Curious George, the curious little monkey. Here he comes, as happy as can be. Curious George, the curious little monkey. Why is he curious? Let's go and see.
Curious George goes camping. George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, were going on a camping trip. George had never camped out before. They had a big trailer attached to the back of their little blue car. In the trailer were all the things they'd need for 3 days in the woods. Sleeping bags to sleep in, food to eat, and a lamp to light their campsite at night. A ranger greeted them at the entrance to the park. There is an empty space near the lake, he said. Have a good time camping and be careful not to hurt the woods or any of the animals that live there. This is a beautiful spot to set up camp, George, said the man with the yellow hat. They parked their car and started to unpack. I'll go to the lake to get us some water to cook with. You can look around the other campsites, but don't get into trouble. George saw a man and a woman taking a walk in the woods. They had packs on their backs. In another camping site, a father was cooking some fish for his family. He had caught the fish in the lake. It smelled good. A little girl was pouring water from a bucket over their campfire. If I don't make sure the fire is out before we leave, she said to George, a spark might leap out and start a fire that could burn up the whole forest. George walked deeper into the woods. Around a bend in the trail, George saw a small tent. Inside the tent was a thin pole standing right in the middle. Suddenly, George heard footsteps. Somebody was coming. He jumped in and knocked over the pole. The tent fell down on him. "Who's in my tent?" the man shouted. "Come out of there right now!" His voice sounded angry. George crawled out and ran away. The man started to chase George. George climbed to the highest branch of a tall pine tree. Now he was safe. From where he was, he could see the entire campground. The man with the yellow hat was putting down a bucket of water beside their tent. George turned around and saw something scary. It was a thin trail of smoke coming from a campsite. Fire, and nobody noticed it. George had to stop the fire, and he knew just what to do. He leaped down and ran to get the bucket of water from his own campsite. He grabbed the bucket and ran past the other campers. "Look at that little monkey," a camper shouted. "Where's he running to?" "Daddy, I see smoke," yelled the little girl. The man with the yellow hat came rushing out of his tent. "Fire," he shouted. "Let's go." And they all ran towards the fire. George emptied his bucket. Everybody helped and poured water over the fire until it was put out. The ranger came to see what had happened. So did the man whose tent fell down. "I was mad at you, George," said the man, "but this sure made up for it." "You're a real fine scout," said the ranger. George and the man with the yellow hat finally went back to their campsite. "George," said the man, "you did all right today. You deserve a good dinner. And we both learned a lot about camping today."
Curious George, the curious little monkey. Here he comes, he's always on the go. Curious George, the curious little monkey. Where's he going? We'd all like to know.
Curious George at the bakery. George was late for breakfast. You ought to have a good time at school today, George. Your class is going to the bakery. Now you'll find out where that toast came from. George grabbed his books and off he went to catch the school bus. Soon George and his classmates were on their way to the bakery. "Welcome," said a big man in a white coat. "I am the foreman. I make sure that everything in the factory is running smoothly. Just follow me and don't get lost." All the machines were humming and buzzing. The bread smelled fresh and sweet. They came to a room where there was a machine that cut the fresh loaves into slices. "Do you see the clock on the wall?" asked the foreman. "When the big hand and the little hand come together at the top, it will be noontime. And all the machines will stop automatically, and all the people who work here will go and have lunch." While the children were listening to the foreman, George wandered off. There was a door slightly open. Inside, a baker in a white t-shirt was making pretzels. He took some dough from a pan, rolled it into a long strip, and then folded the strip back and forth into a pretzel. After the pretzel was made, it passed under a salting machine. The baker pushed a long red lever, and down came the salt. George was curious. While the baker was putting a tray of pretzels in the oven, he leaped up on the table, took some dough, and rolled it into a strip. Then he tried to fold it with all four hands. Now George was all wrapped up in the dough. He tried to fight his way out, but instead fell right on top of the big red lever. George had started the salting machine. Salt poured all over the pretzels and onto the floor. So much salt that it spread through the door right into the hall. The foreman ran into the room. "There is salt all over the fresh bread," he shouted. "Who started the salting machine?" The baker came running and pulled back the red lever to stop the salt. It was time for George to get away. He saw a big basket full of bread right near the factory clock. What a nice place to hide in. "Let's get on with the tour," the foreman said to the children. "Watch your step," the man said. "From here you can see the machine working." Just then, one of the boys on the tour reached into his pocket to get his handkerchief. Something fell out. It was his penknife. It bounced off the edge of the metal floor and landed on a fresh loaf of bread that was moving toward the slicing machine. "Oh my," cried the foreman. "If that knife gets caught in the slicer, the machine might break. There's no one near the machine to stop it." George heard the commotion and came out of hiding. How could he stop the slicing machine? He looked up at the factory clock. The little hand was up, but the big hand was still far away. How good that George was a monkey. He leaped over to the clock, held on the little hand, and with his foot grabbed the big hand. Then, very quickly, he pulled the two hands together. And all the machines in the factory stopped. "Hooray!" shouted the foreman. The loaf of bread with the penknife on it had stopped right in front of the slicing machine. "George," said the foreman, "what a clever monkey you are. You saved the slicing machine and your classmate's knife. For that, you deserve a good lunch." In the lunchroom, they all had sandwiches made out of the freshly baked bread. The foreman gave George a whole bag of warm pretzels with lots of salt on them. Then George and his classmates went back home.